The research you'll see presented today is being supported by recent funding opportunity from the U.S. Department of Energy for technologies on Eagle impact minimization. To tell you a little more about the background for these projects, I'll turn things over to Jocelyn Brown-Saracino with the U.S. Department of Energy. Jocelyn manages the environmental research portfolio for the DOE's wind and water power technologies. So, Jocelyn?
Great, thanks so much. So as mentioned, all of the projects that you're going to hear about over the course of the webinar today have been selected for funding through a funding opportunity provided by the U.S. Department of Energy's Wind Energy Technologies Office. And I'm just going to provide a little bit of background on the solicitation under which these projects were selected. So that solicitation was issued in June of last year, and the purpose of it was really to try to advance the commercial readiness of Eagle detection and impact minimization technologies in order to ensure that the wind stakeholder community has proven and affordable tools that will allow us to minimize the risk of possible Eagle take at wind farms. The projects that you're going to hear about today were selected for funding in December of 2016, and from a DOE process perspective, that means that we undergo a period of negotiation prior to final review and issuing of awards. Most of the projects that we're going to hear about today are in kind of the final stages of review and negotiation, and a few of them have been awarded. So all of the work that you're going to hear is kind of future looking. So we're going to be talking about plans for future work today. You can go on to the next slide. So the solicitation that these projects were selected under was based around the concept of trying to advance projects through technology readiness levels. So I wanted to just very briefly introduce the concept of technology readiness levels before diving into the description of the topic areas under the solicitation. Technology readiness levels is basically just a way of creating a stepwise process by which technology is developed, moving from basic research through the development of prototypes, testing, all the way through what we call technology readiness level 9, which is a system that's ready for full commercial development and deployment. And our philosophy here is that we're really trying to make sure that we're supporting low and mid TRL research so that we're expanding the number of potential solutions moving forward. And under this solicitation, we were also aiming to provide independent testing and verification for more advanced systems so that we could ensure that there was publicly available efficacy data for these systems available to the whole range of stakeholders who might be interested in seeing it. So you can move on to the next slide. So there were 3 topic areas under this. There were 3, you guys might want to mute your phones. There were 3 topic areas under this solicitation. The first is focused on Eagle physiology and behavior. And this was really working to support research to really help us better understand Eagle ability to sense and respond to stimuli. And the motivation here was really to help us better understand and identify what are the signals that are most likely to serve as optimal deterrents to deter eagles away from wind turbines. And there were 2 projects that were selected under this topic area that you'll hear about today, one led by a team of researchers from University of Minnesota and partnering organizations, and the other led by a team from Purdue University and partnering organizations. And we can move on to the next slide. So the second topic area under the solicitation really is focused on trying to advance lower to mid TRL level technologies with the aim of trying to demonstrate the reliable ability to detect and deter eagles in the field outside of a wind farm. So really trying to prove out these prototypes prior to really installing a full system and proving efficacy at a wind farm. And there are two projects that were selected under this topic area that you'll hear about today, one led by Lawful Wind Group and the other led by Oregon State University. Next slide. So the final topic area under this solicitation was really meant to provide the successful demonstration, the independent testing and verification of near commercially ready systems. And the intent here was to demonstrate a statistically significant reduction in potential risk of eagle take, and also to demonstrate simultaneously system affordability. And as Lauren mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, there are two projects that we're going to hear about today that were selected under this topic area, both led by the American Wind Wildlife Institute. And so with that, I'll pass the webinar back over to our host. But before I do, just wanted to mention that this solicitation and leading up to designing this solicitation was really a community effort. We got feedback through a variety of mechanisms, ranging from requests for information to workshops. We had the support of expert reviewers in the review process, and also worked really closely with the Fish and Wildlife Service around designing the solicitation. And so just want to offer our thanks to the group of folks who really supported the development of this solicitation with their expertise. And want to note that we're really excited to see how these projects unfold over the next couple of years.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Jocelyn. So first up, we have two presentations in the first topic area Jocelyn mentioned, which is eagle physiology and behavior. Our first presentation is Understanding the Golden Eagle Sensory World to Enhance Detection and Response to Wind Turbines, presented by Jeff Lucas and Esteban Fernandez-Hurisic, who are professors from Purdue University.
Should we start?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to tell you about our research. I think one of the most interesting things is to realize that birds are visually oriented organisms. They rely on vision to make a lot of decisions related to foraging, flying, and so forth. But the interesting thing is that, as you all know, there have been collisions between birds and wind turbines. So this is kind of a paradox in a way, because if they are so visually oriented, how so they're colliding with these wind turbines? And we don't know the answer to that. But a couple of papers suggested that maybe it has to do with the way they perceive things visually. And that's a good point, because one of the most interesting things about birds is that they perceive their world visually in a way that is extremely different from the way humans do it. So birds, besides their binocular vision, have a wide lateral field, so they have a very developed lateral vision, so they get information from the right and the left visual field. Their eyes are big relative to their body masses, so they have a high visual acuity. Their retinas can sample visual stimuli much faster than our retinas can, so they have higher temporal visual resolution. Birds have four different types of visual pigments. We have 3 types of visual pigments in our retinas. So what that means is that birds can see colors that humans cannot even imagine. And finally, birds have these very interesting organelles in their photoreceptors called oil droplets that functionally translates into a better ability to discriminate color.
Birds also hear in a way that's different than we do. So, for example, this top figure is something called an audiogram, a human audiogram. And what it plots is the ability of a human to detect a sound as a function of the frequency of the sound. And the bottom line in humans is that we hear over a very wide range of frequencies, from about 30 hertz all the way up to 20,000 hertz. Birds are not that good at over a wide range of frequencies. So, for example, in woodpeckers, woodpeckers are fairly good at hearing frequencies over the range of maybe 1 to 6,000 hertz. One of the reasons that that's the case is that humans have a very different inner ear than do birds. Humans have a very long inner ear membrane that allows them to dissect sounds. It's on the order of about 33 millimeters, whereas in birds, they have a straight membrane that's about 1/10 the size. And so again, the point is that the sensory physiology, the capacity of birds to detect their world is very different from ours, and that underscores the fact that we need to know what the world looks like from a bird's perspective in order to be able to test the capacity of us to deter them from these wind turbines.
So what we intend to do with this project is to make these wind turbines more conspicuous from the perspective of birds, and more specifically from the perspective of eagles. And the way we want to do that is by first understanding how eagles perceive their world from a visual and an auditory perspective, and then try to develop or suggest stimuli that can be used later with different types of technology. So, as we were saying, given these differences in the sensory world between birds and humans, we want to characterize the visual and auditory system of eagles to try to identify what we call the sensory sweet spots, areas with high stimulation in the brain. And then from these sensory sweet spots, we want to build stimuli that these animals can easily perceive, and then test those stimuli using behavioral assays in order to establish whether the stimuli can increase the attention or the avoidance responses of the eagles. So more specifically, we are going to measure key components of the visual and auditory system of eagles. We're going to model sensory perception to identify the stimuli with the highest sensory stimulation. And ultimately, we're going to run behavioral tests in wildlife rehabilitation centers to determine the behavioral responses of the eagles to combinations of visual and acoustic stimuli. Our model species or study species are going to be the golden eagle and bald eagle for obvious conservation reasons. And from the perspective of the visual system, one of the potential things that we could think of developing is lights that we can attach somewhere in the wind turbines with the hope that they would increase these attention response or deterrence response. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure specific characteristics of their visual systems, and these are characteristics that are going to inform the design of these lights, for instance. So we're going to measure their visual field configuration, how much binocular overlap, lateral vision they have, and this is going to be useful in determining the viewing angle of the lights. We're going to measure the density of what we call the retinal ganglion cells, which are involved in visual acuity, and that will allow us to project the centers of acute vision in the visual field, and that's going to be very important to establish what is the position of the lights in the wind turbine that could enhance detection. Finally, we're going to measure the sensitivity and density of the different types of photoreceptors, and we're going to couple that with some perceptual modeling in order to establish the light colors that would have the highest level of conspicuousness in different ambient light conditions.
And in a similar way, what we're going to try to do is to look at how the auditory system of birds responds to various kinds of sounds. And really what we're looking for is a sound that's particularly salient, that will alert a bird in a very short period of time. And so our plan is to try sounds that change over time, either change in frequency or change in amplitude or both. And so what we can do is we can test a range of tones, and one of the places that we might look for for the kinds of tones that they can respond to maximally are the tones that are used in their vocal repertoire. We can also try simple tone sweeps, just a rapid change in frequency over time. We can sort of frequency modulate tones to see if that's alerting. We can also try an amplitude modulation, and in fact, one of the reasons why you can tell what I'm saying right now is not because of the frequency changes in my voice, but more importantly, the amplitude modulation properties of the voice, which actually most people don't realize. And so what we can do then is test how the bird's auditory system responds to all of these changing sounds with the expectation that certain properties of change in sound might be maximally stimulating. And then what we can do is to test these sounds under the kinds of intensity levels that they should be heard in the field. And we can also test the sounds both with and without background noise. And this is important because on a windy day, for example, we want to make sure that the birds can nonetheless hear these sounds. And so testing the auditory system with both background noise and without noise can give us an insight into how the birds can respond to these sounds over a variety of conditions. With respect to behavior tests, the plan is to run these sort of two choice tests. We'll have a perch on two sides of a cage, and then have different stimuli on the two sides, and then see how they respond to those stimuli. And what we're going to do is we're going to test the stimuli in sort of three stages. The first thing that we need to do is to figure out, well, what stimuli are we going to use in these experiments? The first stage, what we're going to do is to test light. Now, what we can do is to go to the physiology to get some indication about the kinds of light stimuli that should maximally alert eagles. And the plan then is to identify 9 different light stimuli that will alert eagles from the physiology. In stage 2, we will do the same thing with sound. Again, identify 9 different sound kinds of stimuli that are likely to alert eagles. And then the third stage is to use information from the first 2 stages to generate, if you will, a multimodal stimulus that has both light and sound. And we're going to do that by taking the 2 strongest light and the 2 strongest sound stimuli and put those together, and we'll have all combinations of 2 lights and 2 sound stimuli, and that generates 4 multimodal stimuli. The stages will also obviously include a behavioral component, and so for stage 1 and 2, so stage 1 is light again, and stage 2 is sound. The plan is to have, for example, one light stimulus on one side of the cage and nothing on the other side of the cage, and then see how they respond, how the birds respond to each of those 9 light stimuli. And so that will give us some index of how our light stimuli then alert the eagles. We'll do the same thing with sound. We'll have a sound, one of the 9 sounds on one end, and then nothing on the other, and then watch how the bird responds when the sound comes up, and that'll give us some index about the level of alerting that sound generates. Based on stages 1 and 2, we can then get some indication about the best 2 light stimuli and the best 2 sound stimuli, and then the plan is to take those 4 combinations, 2 light times 2 sound is 4 combinations, and then test those combinations against each other so that at the end of the experiment we will have a stimulus that seems to be particularly well tuned to both the auditory system and the visual system of the eagles that generates the strongest behavior response. So that's the plan. And here's generally how we're thinking about this system. The idea is that the bird is moving through its territory, and there are these static objects called turbines that are just sort of scattered in their territory. Now the idea is that there'll come some point where the bird detects that stimulus, that object. It will then change its visual attention and then look at the turbine. At some point in time, it will then begin a response in response to that turbine, which will hopefully generate an avoidance. Now, the fundamental problem is that the time of detection and the time of visual attention occurs too late. And when it occurs too late, the problem is that the avoidance response occurs too late, and the result is that the bird will end up in the turbine instead of avoiding it. And so our plan then is to increase the area over which the turbine is detected and the area over which the bird is attending to that turbine. And again, the plan is to do this not only with visual stimuli, but also with auditory stimuli that again maximizes the distance over which both detection and attention occur. So the research team is Esteban, who talked mostly in the beginning of this, me, Jeff Lucas, who that would be right now. Both Esteban and I are at Purdue University, and then Todd Katzner has been working on eagles for some time. Okay, and so that's what we have.
Great, thank you so much. I think we're getting an echo. If you can please mute your line if you're on the phone. Thank you. So questions. You can send us questions through the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen there. Just type in your question, send it along. I want to make sure we have time for the other presentations, so we'll see if maybe one or two come in, but then move on to the next presentation. All right, I think we'll probably get this question a lot. When do you expect to have results?
Well, as soon as we can, obviously. But one of the limiting components here is the physiological work, right? So it takes some time to gather the visual and auditory data. But we think that within a period of 1 year, we'll have some understanding of the physiological basis of how eagles hear and see. And by the end of the second year, hopefully, we will have most of the behavioral results and we'll be able to put together all the data.
Great, thanks. I think we'll do one more, and then we can come back with additional questions at the end if we have time. What is the potential for habituation to the light or sound stimuli in eagles?
Well,
Jeff, would you like to address that?
Yeah, that's an incredibly important question. And the answer is that it depends on how often those stimuli are used, but it also depends on how sort of dynamic those stimuli are. And so one of the things that we hope to do in our behavioral tests is to look at how important giving the stimulus over and over to these birds is. Now, there are stimuli for humans, for example, that are annoying no matter how often you hear them. There are other stimuli, for example, just a loud sound, that you can become adapted to quite rapidly. And so part of our behavioral approach is to actually look at that pattern. Now the fact is that the eagles are not going to be bumping into wind turbines all the time. The advantage of that is that it's less likely for them to adapt to these signals. And so the combination of a sort of reduced rate at which they're subject to these stimuli and stimuli that are resistant to adaptation, I think will generate a system where it should be a long time, if ever, that they respond to these stimuli. I mean, that they adapt to these stimuli. But it's a great question. It's extraordinarily important.
Great, thank you. So I want to make sure we've got time for the other presentation, so we're going to go ahead and switch to the next one.
All right, our next presentation is Detection and Perception of Sound by Eagles and Surrogate Raptors, presented by Jeffrey Marr, who is Associate Director of Engineering at the St. Anthony Falls Laboratory, University, Minnesota. Jeff?
Hello, hello. So
Hi.
thank you, everyone. So I'll present briefly an overview of our project. I'm joined on the call with many of our team members. Our project is called Detection and Perception of Sound by Eagles and Surrogate Raptors. Our focus is on the hearing abilities of eagles, golden and bald. Before we get into the project itself, I wanted to talk about our team a little bit. We're very excited about the team we have. We cover a broad range that we believe is required for the project. We have audiologists, we have auditory neuroscientists, we have colleagues at the university, at the Raptor Center, which is a highly regarded facility, veterinary clinic services, and an educational facility with Julie and Pat Reddig serving that role. We have, how do I advance these things? Myself, I'm a civil engineer specializing in fluid mechanics, and we host here at the University of Minnesota a substantial wind energy research program, a lot of work ongoing with industry and with the Department of Energy, and so that we can bring that element to our project, a connection into industry and an understanding for what wind energy is challenged with in terms of barriers and environmental barriers such as this topic. And then we have two researchers, Ed Walsh and Joanne McKee, who are at the Boys Town National Research Hospital in Omaha. They're auditory neuroscientists and specialize in the work that we're going to present. So we're very excited about our team, and what our goal is here, our objective is really what was presented at the beginning. We're focused on creating knowledge that can enable innovators and industry to move forward with developing deterrent technologies, and to have good information, reliable information on how to develop those technologies, and in particular, sound-based deterrent technologies. This bulleted list is a summary of the key objectives. We're looking at assessing auditory function in bald and golden eagles. We're identifying acoustic stimuli that could be exploited to develop acoustic deterrents. I'll move my little arrow here. We're identifying vocalizations and other auditory stimuli that result in measurable behavior response in eagles. One of the important aspects to our work will be determining whether red-tailed hawks have similar auditory characteristics, so that the red-tailed hawks could be used as surrogate species in validating deterrent technologies. And then a major task is disseminating our findings into industry and into innovators. Our methods are auditory brain stem response and ASSR techniques. And then we're also going to talk a little bit more here about identifying possible auditory deterrents and how we're going to do that, and then focusing on auditory stimuli that create measurable response. And at this point, if my colleague Ed Walsh is on, I would turn it over to Ed. Ed, are you out there?
Yes, I am.
Great. I invite you to talk a little bit more about some of the items here.
Sure.
The first two items, please. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, basically, our approach is pretty straightforward, and it's not surprising that the approaches that we're using are very similar to the approaches that our colleagues at Purdue are using. And in particular, I'll give a little bit more detail, perhaps, about the methodology we're going to use. First of all, the approach incorporates two, very well-established, very highly reliable and highly replicable auditory evoked potential methods that will be used to assess auditory function. In both cases, the birds are sedated, and the responses are recorded from little subdermal electrodes that are placed beneath the skin in the bird's head. They are so non-invasive procedure, and the first one that we'll talk about very briefly is called the auditory brainstem response, and it will be, to a large extent, the workhorse of the study, at least one aspect of the study. It's been around since about in the 1960s. It basically is a very straightforward, it's almost like a signature of the auditory pathway in response to sound, in that there are a series of voltages that are produced and occur at discrete points in time following the onset of a stimulus. And again, they're extremely reliable and replicable. Generally speaking, even though and they are best produced in response to either transient stimuli like clicks or pure tone, very brief pure tones, because the response requires the auditory, the neuronal components of the system to synchronize their responses to produce this voltage that appears in time following the onset of the signal. It's probably oversimplistic to say this. No, it is actually oversimplistic to say this, but generally speaking, you can think of this successive series of peaks or voltage peaks or waves as bioelectrical activity that that passes up the auditory brainstem, kind of like a wave of activity from one auditory center to the next higher center. It's an overly simplified way of thinking about it, but nonetheless, it does provide a significant amount of information about auditory performance at the physiological level. Again, as I mentioned, the ABR will be the workhorse, and we're focusing not only on sensitivity, but that will be the primary objective as well, to evaluate the range of frequencies that both bald and golden eagles are able to detect. And we think we think of this as the workhorse because the ABR is a test that can be executed in relatively short periods of time. And even though as Jeff mentioned, the bird audiogram, generally speaking, is pretty narrow. I mean, ranging between 1 and not much, certainly not higher than 10 kilohertz. But for every species that we study, it's really important to determine that this bird doesn't have specializations that might influence the development of deterrent tools, acoustic tools, for example. I mean, even though we don't expect that would be the case, the ABR will allow us to identify the upper limit of frequency hearing in this bird, and to do that efficiently. So we think the ABR is the best way to go there. On the other hand, the ABR is not a very good tool for detecting low frequency signals, and again, wanting to determine what the low frequency range or the low frequency limit of hearing in both of these birds are. We want to be able to look at those signals, those responses as well, and that's where the ASSR will come in, because those sustained steady state responses will allow us to evaluate the responses at the low end of the frequency range. But in addition to that, we also plan to employ protocols that take advantage of what our Purdue colleagues talked about as well, responses to complex stimuli, and we want to understand, of course, what they tell us about auditory performance. Unlike the tonal stimuli to be used in the ABR protocol, stimuli that we will use in this phase of the study will either be amplitude or frequency modulated. And without going into details, I don't think we have time for that, by sinusoidally modulating either the frequency or the amplitude of a sound, that generates a well-controlled stimulus that will permit us to determine the temporal response characteristics of the system. The rationale underlying this plan is that when one encounters response characteristics evoked by the stimuli that are non-modulated, are more static in character, these more complex stimuli will, at least they should, elicit a stronger auditory response, and determining auditory responsivity to a range of complex stimuli will provide important information that will be used in constructing stimuli for playback studies and the assessment of behavioral responses in general, which is a more time-consuming process. We will
Ed?
Yes.
I'm getting the hand raised here that I got to move through the rest of the slides.
Okay.
So I appreciate it. I don't mean to cut you off.
Take it away.
So we're running low on time, but I just want to move to the other, talk a bit about facilities quickly. We have, well, first, before that, we'll talk about surrogate raptors. The idea, and especially the folks that are online that are thinking farther down the technology readiness level, we're going to need to be able to demonstrate effectiveness of technologies. Bald and golden eagles are challenging to work with. They're rare, and we are hypothesizing that red-tailed hawks are a viable surrogate bird. They're ubiquitous. They're all over North America, and we have good access to them here in Minnesota through the Raptor Center. And so they'll be part of our study, and the results will tell us whether our hypothesis is on track or not. Facilities are important. The Raptor Center is a key part of our program because it is a large facility and they have access to many many bald eagles every year through their education birds and also birds that come through their clinic. And our goal is to look at 10 bald eagles, 10 golden eagles, and at least 10 red-tailed hawks through this study. Our golden eagles will be provided any eagles that come through the Raptor Center, but also with an external facility, CIA, the Comanche Nation Ethno-Ornithological Initiative, is agreed to provide us access to golden eagles. We also have sensory labs that are run through the Department of Speech, Language, Hearing Sciences, and this will be a location for our testing. High-quality data collected in this site. Another facility is one that we will build. It's a small and portable facility that we can do these ABR and ASSR tests within, and we will use this facility in our remote locations as well as adjacent to the Raptor Center facility. And if you know the University of Minnesota, we have Minneapolis campus and St. Paul campus, and separated only by 12 miles. And the Raptors are in St. Paul, and many of us are in Minneapolis. So it's ideal to be able to move this facility right to the eagles and work with them near where they're kept and where they can recover safely. Finally, knowledge transfer is a big part of our project. We hope to build lots of relationships with people on the call here, making sure that the information we learn gets out into industry and into people that are thinking about innovation is really important. And so using the wind energy research program that we have here with my colleague Chris Miller and myself, we'll be bringing those findings into the industry as best we can. And so with that, I'll wrap up, and if there's time, we can take a few questions.
Thank you. Thanks for moving through those quickly. We've got a lot of presentations, and we want to make sure we have time for all of them. So no questions have come in, just a few, and we'll follow up with you directly afterwards because I I want to move on to the next presentation now, and if we have time at the end, we will come back to your questions. So feel free to send them through the Q&A box, and we will get back to them if we can.
Okay, great. So now we're moving into the next topic area, which is prototype advancement through laboratory and small-scale field testing. And our first presentation in that topic area is radar-based Eagle Take Minimization System by Eric Laufer of Lauferwind. Eric?
Hey, how's it going?
Great.
Great. Well, thanks for having me today. And so happy to present and let you know what our research is and what we're working on. So this is a little bit of background on my company. We've been at it since 2008, and the original product was to develop a radar system that controlled the FAA aviation obstruction lights and only have them on when an aircraft is present. So before we were around, the lights were on all night, but our technology, the aircraft detection system, looks for aircraft. When it doesn't see any aircraft, the lights are kept off. And when the aircraft are detected by the radar, we in turn turn the lights on. We had a lot of firsts that we're very proud of. We were the first company to demonstrate such a system to the FAA, and that test occurred at NRAL, which has been just great partners for us in that product development and also in our work with Eagles. We had the first operational radar lighting system, or aircraft detection lighting system, as it's known to the FAA. And yeah, we've had, I can't tell you how many times we presented to customers, and they said, we like your product, and if we're going to invest in a radar system on our wind farm, we really would like it to do eagle detection also. And we heard what they were saying, and we started to actively investing our own dollars, and now with support from the DOE, continuing our work to look for eagles, and not apropos to this project, but also drones as well, which are actually have a lot of similar characteristics to from a radar's perspective to eagles. So this is a little bit about our radar. We developed it, for the radar lighting technology, but radar is a generic sensor that can detect any object. If it's smaller, it's harder to find, but it just means that your range is shorter. It's a special radar that we developed. It's a magnetron-based radar with pulse Doppler capabilities. Historically, you could divide a line down the middle of radar. Some are magnetrons and some are solid state, and typically the solid state transceivers were required to do Doppler processing, which allows you to find moving targets among difficult clutter, like mountainous and terrain or trees or really anywhere in the real world. But magnetrons could not. But we put a lot of engineering effort to achieve Doppler processing with a magnetron-based radar, and that really allows us to create a radar sensor with the performance of others, but really at a fraction of their cost. So that's where we sort of start with. These are some of the specs. I think whether it's being recorded or distributed, happy to talk more about these. But in general, it's a small package, about 4 feet wide. It only takes a few hundred watts of power, and it can be mounted on whether the side of a wind turbine or a Met tower or a dedicated tower. Lots of options based on where the particulars of the wind farm might need.
Technical, and we were trying to find. Given the fact that the.
I think if you're on the phone, can you please mute your line if you're not speaking? Thanks.
I think
we're getting some background noise.
Technical aspect of it. I think it might provide the.
Well, I guess I'll just talk louder. Always a good approach. So in February of last year, we partnered with Auburn University, and we were maintaining our agreements with NRAL, and we brought Auburn University's War Eagle to NRAL to see how our radar did with the detecting of golden and balded eagles. I'm not the biggest. I wasn't the biggest college football fan, but apparently the Auburn War Eagles are very famous across the country, and people were pretty excited that these birds were about. But our purpose was really R&D and scientific. So we had the birds fly predetermined flight paths, which was great because they were trained to do so. We put GPS units on their tails so we could have a strong record of where the birds were when, and see how our radar tracks compared to the GPS logs. And this is just one example of one track where the radar tracks. The radar spins at an update rate of about 3 seconds, and the GPS we log at about 8 seconds. So the radar has less updates than GPS, but we found in general we did quite well tracking the radar, tracking the birds with the radar, and found good correlation between the eagle's position with the GPS and where the radar thought it was. So this really gave us a lot of confidence that we could leverage the radar and the R&D that we've had for our radar lighting system and take it to the next step and use it to track and detect eagles. The challenge though, is that from a wind farm's perspective, and I guess from a regulatory perspective, all birds are not the same. So you might want to curtail your turbine to protect it from killing an eagle, but you might not want to take the same hit to your bottom line if a turkey vulture flies through. So to determine what species you've been detecting, you really need to add cameras. And so we've designed a system architecture where a number of radars surround the wind farm, very similar to the way we do with radar lighting, but we also had cameras around the wind farm. And as the radars detect tracks, and initially we're not sure what that track is, we just know there's a moving object, we can then point the cameras to the position of the radar tracks, and then once the cameras can see the birds flying in the field of view, and we can do some pre-filtering based on radar characteristics in terms of the size of the return and the speed. We know that from the radar data. But once the camera points at it, then we can say, what is that bird? Is that a turkey vulture? Is that a golden eagle? Is that a bald eagle? Is it a hawk? The cameras and machine learning algorithms can tell us that. So here's a question. So this is actually a pretty well-known in the nerdy circles that I roll with, by a cartoonist called XKCD. This is sort of a classic where a manager's asking a researcher, if you can tell me where these pictures are taken, how hard is that? And she says it's easy. We'll just use GIS mapping and look it up. And then she says, okay, we'll check whether this photo is a bird or not. And the response is, I'll need a research team in 5 years. Well, so how hard is it to use machine learning and cameras to determine not just that the object is a bird, but that the bird is a golden eagle or a bald eagle or a turkey vulture? And the answer is it's pretty hard, but not so hard nowadays. So a tremendous amount of effort's been put together by a number of groups. One example is CAFE. This was done by the University of Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley. But Google has a machine learning open source platform called TensorFlow that can do the same type of work. And essentially, the really challenging algorithmic machine learning work to do species identification has already been done. It's been done in a more general sense than we need. And the way machine learning works is you have a general algorithm that can do classification, and then you train it. You say, we like it to identify eagles. So we're going to give it thousands of pictures of eagles and say those are eagles. And we're going to give it thousands of pictures of turkey vultures and say those are turkey vultures. And then we're going to give it thousands of pictures of spaghetti and say this is not an eagle. And it learns, it just chews through the data sets, and it's called training, and it can do very well. So CAFE has an online demo. This is untrained, so this is straight off the web, where you can give it pictures of bald eagles, and it'll tell you it's a bald eagle. You can give it pictures of vultures, and it'll tell you it's a vulture. So these are just screenshots from online demos. This source code is readily available. Anybody can get it. We can get it. You can get it. And we're going to take the source code, and we're going to design the neural networks and modify them in the machine learning for our particular task. But what we're really going to do is we're going to spend our efforts taking what they have and leveraging all that effort and train it with data sets to make sure that the system is highly attuned to the birds and really the targets that we're looking for, which are bald eagles and golden eagles. So that's a pretty fast version of what we're up to, and we obviously appreciate the financial support from the DOE and then the people that organized this conference, this online presentation. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. So I think we have a minute or two for questions. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box and send it over. I'm not seeing any yet. I think I can predict that folks are curious about kind of timeline for results, if you want to say anything about that.
I guess we're expecting results to share in about 18 months.
Great, thanks. Okay, here we go. How far away can you recognize an eagle with the camera?
We're expecting identification to be in the order of 1 kilometer.
Okay, great. And let's see, how many cameras do you estimate will have to be deployed to properly triangulate the bird on site?
Well, the number of cameras will correspond to the size of the wind farm. I think there's no, but I think in terms of the actual triangulation, there's no triangulation necessary. So the radar is going to tell the general system exactly where the object is, and so we don't need to triangulate with the cameras. And then the cameras will, we know where the radar is, we know where the target is, and we know where the cameras are. We point the cameras to the target, so the cameras won't do any triangulation.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions, so why don't we move on to our next presentation.
Great, okay, thanks, Eric. Our next presentation is a system for eagle detection, deterrent, and collision detection for wind turbines, presented by Roberto Albertani, Associate Professor at Oregon State University. Roberto?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep, please go ahead.
Okay, all right. I'd like to thank you, DOE, for funding for this project first, and everybody to having me here to present. First, I would like to introduce briefly the main team members, myself, and then there is Dr. Matthew Johnston and Dr. Sinisa Todorovic. They are both at the Electrical Engineering and Computer Science Department here at Oregon State University. Matthew is an expert in micro sensors and communication between those sensors, and Sinisa is a multi-year expert in intelligent vision systems. And plus, we have Ms. Manuela Huso. She is at the USGS, and she will help in design experiments and work on statistical data processing. And then we had Dr. Todd Katzner, also at the USGS, who is an expert in raptors and specifically in eagles. See if I can change. So the brief outline of the presentation, we talk about the three subsystems that are eagle detection, eagle deterrent, and blade impact detection. Motivation, of course, we would like to support the growth of domestic wind energy and at the same time protecting wildlife. We talk about a simple and affordable system which will include basically off-the-shelf hardware, therefore will be less expensive and reliable. And we are looking at the autonomous blade strike detection and species recognition for the deterrent system validation, certification, and eventually also site assessment. Are my slides showing properly on the screen?
Yep, yep.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So first, the general system will be units on the turbine blades, on turbine nacelle, and they will be connected each other either by the SCADA system when available and or wireless local communication. All the sensors will be synchronized by a central unit, and see if I can work with and then we will have the impact detection system. There will be a microsensor on the blade and the wireless micro camera on the blade for species recognition. The detection system will include one single 360 degrees view camera on top of nozzle of the wind turbine, and that will eventually detect if the incoming bird is an eagle, and then if so, will trigger visual deterrent on the ground. There will be a certain number of tall air dancers activated again by the computer, by a sensor, by the camera signal. The eagle detection, again, is a 360 degrees off-the-shelf camera, and we require a limited number of frames to recognize if an incoming bird is an eagle, and we don't need high resolution. It's already ready to installation. We just need to hook up and run an algorithm that has two different mathematical function. One is the CNN, is a convolutional neural network, and or adding an LSTM, which is a long short-term memory. We already tested the system in a very preliminary way by running 20 videos of falcon, 30 videos of eagle, just basically video that we just have from the network, and 18 videos of gulls. And we have a very high, we believe, rate of success of recognizing the falcon, the gull, and the eagle was 84.6%, just very preliminary, without a custom software trained yet for eagle. So our plan is to customize the detection software, use one camera. The cost of those cameras between $200 and $300, by the way, and we probably will run several videos that we will obtain from either the network, local Raptor centers, other Raptor centers, and probably we will run at least one field test and filming wild eagles flying in different directions, probably different light, and we will develop a database of images which we will use to train the algorithm for the detection. Then if an eagle is detected, indeed, then the system will activate visual deterrent on the ground. These are just few images of just an example of what a wind dancer is. This is a generic one. This is a wind dancer that we purchase and we test in our wind tunnel just to see how they behave with the typical wind energy wind. And they will eventually be in a cluster around wind turbine or wind turbines. Operation will be in sequence or in random order. The interesting part of the wind dancer, of course, is number one, is cheap, reliable, and then and the fail-safe activation of the device, meaning if there is a false positive, the system can be programmed to activate the deterrent anyway, and will not the deterrent be turbine agnostic and will not interact in any way with the operation of the wind turbines. It will not be a problem if it's activated for a false positive signal. Moreover, we think that the deterrents will not maybe scare or disturb eagles, but also their prey on the ground, and so they probably will have less interest to flying around areas that there are basically no prey. So then the third and last but not least subsystem is what about to certify, to check if the deterrent work, and and therefore we use experience that we gain thanks to another US DOE Golden Field Office funding for bird and bats impact detection on offshore wind energy systems. So we already had some experience in testing and with accelerometers and contact microphone on blades. This is just an example of some tests. We were shooting tennis balls against the rotor, and we were able to detect the impact on one blade. These are sensors on all three blades, so we can see that by just one blade hitting the tennis ball, we could detect the impact on all three blades. And therefore, those sensors will start a camera. I don't have a picture here, but the camera are micro wireless cameras, one per each blade, that will have a view on the blade. We can save a certain number of frames before and after the event and do species recognition. The new system that we plan to develop is as a complete with an IMU, inertial measurement unit, that will tell us the position of each blade at the time of impact, and also we will have a local processor in a way that we can run locally post-processing of the data to have a impact situation in real time. And now the last slide is I would like to acknowledge again the U.S. Department of Energy, Golden Field Office for funding, and just briefly mention other team members. We plan to do all the non-bird tests again at the National Wind Technology Center in Boulder, Colorado, and at the North American Wind Research and Training Center at the Mesalands Community College in New Mexico. We already been in both locations in our previous project, and we have also an external advisory board with wind energy industry members from wind turbine industry and operators, wind energy operators. Then we had Dr. Rob Surian and Dr. Doug Warwick from Oregon State University. And with this, I finish, and if there is any time, I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box on your bottom right-hand corner of your screen and send them over. Continuing with the theme, could you say anything about kind of timeline for results?
Yes, we actually, I was on the phone just yesterday with the National Wind Energy Technology Center, and we plan to have the first field test in about 12 months, 13 months from now. And of course, before that, we will do field tests with filming eagles and run lab tests with the detection system that we plan to have results from real eagle flying as a detection in the lab maybe in 7-8 months from now.
Okay, great. And how about someone's asking if you have a timeline for commercial availability?
That's an interesting question. All the hardware are basically off-the-shelf hardware, and I just guesstimate the cost of the hardware for detection, impact detection, and deterrent. If we talk about one wind dancer, is probably approximately probably close or even less than $2,000. We just need to weatherize all the systems, and each air dancer, the cost is about $350, $400, so it will be like $3,000, $3,500 for 3-4 air dancer around one wind turbine with one camera. on the nacelle and one camera for each blade and the sensor on the blade for impact. It should be really easy to convert the pilot system to a commercially available system, just a matter of using the proper weather protection.
Great, thank you. And one more question, going back to the tennis ball experiment. Were the blades spinning when the impact was detected for the tennis balls?
Oh, sure. We did those tests by shooting tennis ball by a custom design. Actually, my student designed. They have a lot of fun, I have to say. A compressed air cannon to shoot up to 2 balls at the same time, and we did so towards a functioning wind turbine rotor. Again, the one is the G1.5 in New Mexico, and the Car 3 at NWCC, and we did with the rotor still, the rotor running with the generator not engaged, and with the rotor in full energy production.
Great, thank you. So that's all the questions we've got so far, so we'll turn to the next presentation.
All right, great. So now we're into our last topic area, which is operational demonstration and validation. And the first presentation for this topic area is evaluating the effectiveness of the detection and deterrent system in reducing golden eagle fatalities at operational wind facilities. This will be presented by Tabor Allison, the Director of Research for the American Wind Wildlife Institute. Tabor?
Yes, hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So first I just want to thank DOE and NREL for organizing this series of webinars. I particularly enjoyed hearing the other projects that are being funded, and very much look forward to learning about the progress on those projects. As was mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be working on 2 projects, and the technologies we're going to be evaluating, I'll be talking about the first one, a detection and deterrent system, and Isabel Gottlieb, AWWI's technology program manager, will be talking about a detection system. Both systems are at or near commercial readiness, and so broadly we're going to be evaluating these systems at operational wind facilities, 2 operational wind facilities over a multi-year study, and evaluating these systems in their ability to ultimately reduce the collision risk of eagles at wind facilities. I'm going to need some help advancing the slides, so if you could advance to slide 2, please.
Yep, got it.
Thank you. So first, want to talk about our project team, which is composed of AWWI staff, myself, and Isabel. And the technology we'll be evaluating is DT Bird, developed by Lichen, a Spanish-based company. And the 2 members of the project team are Agustin Uriel Perez and Marcos Puente, who are DT Bird staffers. And then we are working with our field investigation team from H.T. Harvey Associates, Jeff Smith, Judd Howell, Jeff Zerpoli, and Scott Terrell. And so together this project team will be designing and implementing the project on DT Bird. If you could advance to the next slide, please.
Yep.
We've already heard a little bit about AWWI, and so what I particularly just want to mention here is that there's an excellent confluence between DOE's goals in this section of the EAGLE funding opportunity and what we refer to as our technology verification program, which is the goal of which is to coordinate testing and evaluation of technologies intended to detect and deter raptors and bats at wind energy facilities with a particular focus on near commercial or commercial ready technologies. If I go to the next slide, please, and talk a little bit about our technology, DT-BIRD. DT-BIRD is a detection and deterrent system for intended to reduce collision mortality at both on and offshore wind turbines. It consists of a detection component, a camera-based detection component, and a sound-based deterrent technology. And you can see the system as it looks like, or as it's installed on a turbine with magnets, and power supplied to the camera, which is down at the lower portion of the photo at the lower right-hand corner of the slide, and then the speakers that provide the deterrent signals up above in that picture. Essentially, the operation of this is, as it's intended, is that the cameras are programmed to detect eagle-sized birds, and after a detection event occurs, when the object, such as an eagle, approaches within approximately 245 meters, there is an alert trigger, so an alert signal or a warning signal is emitted by the speakers with the intention of getting the attention of the eagle and therefore increasing its awareness of the turbine in hopes that it will change course. If the alert signal fails to change the course of the eagle and it continues to approach the turbine, and at 175 meters, a dissuasion signal is emitted, which is a more powerful and presumably disturbing, irritating signal that is intended to get the eagle to change course. And then finally, there's another function which is referred to as a stop control function, which is basically a signal to stop the turbine from operating, and we will not be evaluating that function on this test. Next slide, please. We have two project objectives: evaluating the effectiveness of the DT-BIRD system in minimizing the risk of golden eagles colliding with wind turbines, and more specifically to gather information that can be used to improve the technology's effectiveness over time. And secondly, we will attempt to quantify, based on the performance of DT-BIRD's ability to deter eagles from wind turbines, we will attempt to quantify the predicted reduction in collision risk from the operation of the DT-BIRD system. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to do that. Our first task, even as we outlined the components of our study in our DOE application, our first deliverable of this project is to develop a study design suitable for peer review. And that's actually true of both projects. And the peer review will be organized by an entity designated by DOE. And one of the purposes for undergoing this process is both to ensure the soundness of the study design and also to promote coordination between the two tests so that the results of the technology can be compared. The different technology tests can be compared. But our plan is to deploy DT bird units at 2 commercial wind facilities in 2 geographically distinct locations to get at least some indication of how DT bird functions under different environmental conditions. And we plan really 2 separate tests. One, an evaluation of the detection functions of DT bird. How accurately does it identify and at what distance does it detect eagles in this case? And the other approach will be to evaluate the effects of the deterrence function on the behavior of eagles. And so to evaluate the detection functions, we're going to be conducting flight trials with drones. And the purpose for using drones, we have a drone which is built to appear like an eagle. It's approximately eagle size and painted like an eagle. And there are, of course, limitations in using drones because they're not eagles. But because we can control the flight of the drone and with GPS units know its location at any one time, we can run multiple trials to evaluate the ability of the detection system and the deterrence triggering functions to how accurately they function relative to their intended design. We also are considering, and this will be part of the development of the study design, using trained raptors, trained eagles at a test facility. One of the challenges of being evaluating with trained birds is that of flying an eagle at an operating wind facility, and you can imagine the challenges that might entail. So also we will be evaluating the ability of and collecting information of the video and deterrence triggering systems on what we're referring to as in situ or wild birds at both wind facilities. And at one of the wind facilities, we'll be conducting a 2-year experiment to evaluate the effectiveness of the detection system and the deterrence system on the behavioral responses of in situ eagles. So we have a variety of statistical exercises we'll be using for the data. I won't go through these in detail, but essentially we're going to be interested in quantifying the false positives and false negatives from the flight trials, and we're going to be analyzing the behavioral responses of in situ birds to deterrent signals, and we're going to use those behavioral responses as surrogates for effectiveness in reducing collision risk, and we'll be using the services, Fish and Wildlife Services Bayesian model to evaluate this. We'll also be doing a comprehensive system cost analysis, so in effect getting an estimate of what it costs to install a system relative to its effectiveness to work and save eagles. So I know we're running a bit late, and what I want to do is give Isabel a chance, so I'm going to turn things over to her now.
Great, thanks. Isabel, I will pull up PowerPoint and you can go ahead.
Hi, everybody. This is Isabel. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so my name is Isabel Gottlieb. I am AWWI's Technology Verification Program Manager, and I'm going to zip through our second presentation so you can all get on with your days. And our second project is titled Evaluating the Effectiveness of a Camera-Based Detection System to Support Informed Curtailment and Minimize Eagle Fatalities at Wind Energy Facilities. Let's see, where's this button? First, I'd like to introduce our project team from AWWI. Again, we're going to be working primarily, me and Tabor, on this evaluation. Our investigator team for this project is from West Inc., primarily Carl Koschuk and Kristen Nassman. Our technology vendors for this project are Tom Heister at Identiflight and Carlos Jocara at Boulder Imaging. For this project, we'll be conducting an evaluation of the Identiflight technology. So Identiflight is mounted on a freestanding tower, and it is a camera-based detection and informed curtailment technology. It uses artificial intelligence and high-precision optical technology to detect and track eagles within approximately 1 kilometer hemisphere around the tower. Depending on the size of the wind facility, several of these units can be installed on site with their range overlapping slightly so that a single eagle can be tracked from tower to tower as it navigates through the wind energy facility. You can see on the right there are 8 cameras pointing outwards to scan the sky for eagles. And once an eagle is detected, there's a stereoscopic camera unit above the ring of cameras, which can swivel around 360 degrees, and it can track an eagle's path in 3-dimensional space. So the eagle will be tracked by the Identiflight unit, and if Identiflight determines that an eagle is at risk of a collision, it generates a curtailment order that can be programmed to shut down the wind turbine. So we have 2 main objectives for this study as well. The first one is to evaluate how Identiflight performs relative to human biomonitors in detecting and identifying eagles. And the second is to model how Identiflight and the use of biomonitors can reduce eagle fatality predictions through informed curtailment. We're going to deploy 4 Identiflight towers at each of 2 study sites and monitor the skies for raptors alongside functional biomonitor programs. So the Identiflight units will collect detailed data on detection of raptors, including the distance to first detection, classification of whether or not it is an eagle, time to classification as an eagle or non-eagle, the height of the flight, and map its flight path. And Identiflight will keep a detailed record of when it perceives an eagle to be at risk of collision based on its location and flight characteristics, and would be sending a curtailment order to the facility. So to evaluate the performance of the Identiflight system, there are several questions we'll need to examine. The first one is that we're going to need to know how good Identiflight is at recognizing an eagle when it sees one. So we are going to go through its data and verify its identifications and calculate false positives and negative rates for its classification algorithm. We will also compare the performance of Identiflight against the biomonitor program. We'll look at various aspects of the data collected, such as the detection rate, the accuracy of classification, and the performance as a function of environmental variables such as landscape and weather characteristics. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we're going to use the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Bayesian model to estimate the fatality reduction of curtailment supported by Identiflight and by biomonitor programs. And then similar to our other project, in addition to knowing whether this technology works, we also want to know if it's practical and affordable. So we're going to be looking at all of the costs associated with installing and running the Identiflight system, and help wind energy facilities determine whether they are interested and able to invest in Identiflight to reduce fatality at their sites. We'll be producing a final report, and we're going to create a dissemination plan to provide our results to our project team, to the Department of Energy, to stakeholders in the wind energy and conservation communities, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and other interested stakeholders. And if appropriate, we aim to ultimately publish our study in the peer-reviewed literature to add another layer of rigor and credibility to this evaluation. Oops, also I just realized I did not go forward. So with that, I'd like to thank the Department of Energy's Office of energy efficiency and renewable energy, our investigator team at WEST, our technology vendors at Identiflight and Boulder Imaging, and our host sites without whom this project would not be possible. And thanks for listening, and if we have time for any questions from the audience, I guess now is the time.
Great, thank you. So we've got a couple minutes for questions, and let's see. So this question is asking about the kind of comparison between the two projects, because it seems like the evaluation protocols would be different. And do you foresee being able to standardize an evaluation project protocol so that the different systems can be compared?
Yes. So, I mean, our test protocols are obviously different for these different technologies, but we will be working with the DOE and with NREL to work through our study designs and try to design them in a way that they are comparable across technologies.
Great, thank you. And can you say more about what regions the host sites will be in? What regions of the country?
So for this project, one of our field sites is in Wyoming and the other is in Oregon.
Great,
and
thanks.
for the for the D-Bird project, we have a site in Wyoming and a site in California.
Great, thank you. All right, so we're just at 1:30, and Jeff Marr, are you still on? Because we can jump back to a couple questions that came in if folks want to stay on. If folks need to go, thank you so much for joining, and we will be posting the recording and the slides online. Jeff, are you still with us?
Yep, we're still here.
Great. So I will go ahead and ask these if folks are able to stay on, if you don't mind staying on a few extra minutes.
Yeah, I can stick around for a few more minutes.
Okay, great. So this question, hopefully it will make sense to you. Do you know how loudness and sound saliency increases with stimulus bandwidth in eagles?
I'm going to need to, so the next question is whether my colleagues Ed and Joanne or Peggy are still on.
We can also follow up afterwards.
Yeah, that one would have to. I can represent some of the area.
Ed and Joanne are still here.
Oh, okay, Ed, thank you. Did you hear the question, Ed?
Could you repeat it?
Yes, so do we know how loudness and sound saliency increases with stimulus bandwidth in eagles?
So we know we have the answer to that when we're thinking about other species, but it's an unknown variable with regard to this particular species. It really needs to be evaluated on a per-case basis. But that's a subject that is generally understood in a larger context.
Okay, great, thank you. And then anything you can say about timeline for results from your project?
Our project, we will start to see results in a year time. Our full duration of this project is 18 months. But like the others have said on this call, I mean, we understand the urgency for results. So the other comment I wanted to make that there is coordination between the university and the Purdue project as well. So we're looking forward to some initial meetings with the Purdue team and some coordination of methods so that the data sets can really be, can be multiplied in a way that we're using same approaches and support one another. So the timeline is 12 months to final completion in a year and a half.
Great, thank you. And you already answered the last question. So I think we were able to cover most all of the questions. Thank you all for joining on this Friday. And again, we'll post the recording and the slides online if you'd like to refer back to them. And I hope everyone has a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good week.